So after I did my previous Firewalla video, I got a ton of requests from you guys asking, can we use the Firewalla as a router and not put it in transparent bridge mode like we did in the last video. Now, if you haven't seen that video, what we did is we took our Unifi network. We have a Unifi gateway, Unifi switches, APs, VLANs, all that stuff, but we snuck the Firewalla in between and put it in like a transparent hidden mode, and it just looked at all the traffic, all the VLANs, and gave you an element of control using the Firewalla app. You could set up parental controls, you could set up time limits, you could pause internet on devices. It really is a nice addition to a Unifi network. It really is. However, a lot of you out there is like, well, I don't want to buy both. Can I save my money on the Unifi gateway and just use Firewalla as my router? And the answer is yes, you absolutely can. And we're going to talk about that today. So I'm really excited to do this video, guys. We have a ton to cover here. I'll make sure to list chapters down below if you need to skip around a little bit. But we are going to set this baby up and get it working and talk through everything in today's video. Hey guys, welcome to the channel. My name is Tim Triss. Thank you for stopping by today. So like I just mentioned, we have a ton of stuff to cover today, so I want to make sure that we hit the ground running. But I did want to give you a little bit of an agenda so you know what today's video is going to be about. So let's talk about that now. So we are going to be setting up a Firewalla in router mode. There will be no Unifi gateway in today's video. All of the routing, all the rule creation, everything will be done inside the Firewalla using their app. I will give you a brief overview of the app, but we're not going to take a deep dive and a total overview of all the features and stuff that you can do. I really think that probably deserves its own video that I plan on doing down the road. But we will talk about how to navigate the app a little bit. Now, one of the things you guys love about Ubiquiti and setting up these types of networks is to be able to create VLANs, create that separation in your network traffic, create firewall rules, right? So I wanted you guys to see that in today's video. So we're going to kind of do a simple little setup with some VLANs and some firewall rules and show you how that's done inside Firewalla so you guys can kind of, compare that to Ubiquiti a little bit, okay? But one of the cool things that the Firewalla does allow us to do is to be able to install the Unifi Network Application on the device using a Docker container. So we're going to go through that entire setup and I'm going to show you how I got it working on mine. Then, once we have the Unifi controller set up, we'll be able to adopt our equipment, get our APs online, our switch online. We'll even be able to manage our system from unifi.ui.com. So, like I said, lots to cover today. I want to go ahead and get started. So, if this is up your alley, make sure you stay tuned. All right, guys, you know me. I always like to show you guys some diagrams so you guys can see how this is all connected together. I think it helps put all the pieces together for you as we get through the video, and hopefully it'll help kind of paint that picture about what we're actually building today. So let's go take a look at the topology first. So if you see the diagram here, very simple setup, guys. We have our Firewalla as our router. There's no Unifi gateway today. Then we have a 48 port switch because that's what I had laying around, bit overkill. And then we have a Unifi access point. All right, so bringing your attention back to the Firewalla, we have 4 ports up there, ports 1, 2, 3, 4. Port 4 is the default port for WAN connectivity in the Firewalla. So we have a little swooshy line there indicating that our internet connection is going to plug into the Firewalla in port 4. All right. We're going to use port 1 as a trunk port. So we're going to set that up so multiple VLANs that we create will be passed down to our Unifi switch. All right. And then from there, it'll pass it down to the access points and everything, just like you're used to seeing on Unifi. We are not going to be using ports 2 and 3 on our Firewalla today, but just know those are fully manageable ports. You can configure them with VLANs or additional trunk ports or whatever you want to do. And there is no PoE on this device. You are not able to plug a access point into it and have it power the device. You would need some kind of power injector to do that. The last thing I'll point out is that port 1 and port 4, the 2 ports that we're using today, are 2.5 gigabit ports, where 2 and 3 are standard 1 gigabit ports. So this is how we're going to be connected up and doing our setup for today's video. Next, I want to talk about what VLANs we're going to create. Now, guys, I did want to keep this very, very simple. So we're only going to create a couple VLANs for today's video, but I do think this gives you a little sampling of a real world scenario that you could easily build and use in your home. So let's take a look at what we're going to be doing. So for our VLANs, we're going to have 3 total. We're going to have our default VLAN, which is really our secure VLAN. This is the one that we want to protect. This is one our computers are going to use, our cell phones are going to use. We're going to do our online banking. We're also going to make this our management VLAN, so our access point and our switch will also pull an IP address from this VLAN. Now, this VLAN is going to be 192.168.1.1, keeping it very typical. It's going to be designated as VLAN 1, and we will build some Wi-Fi around it. The Wi-Fi name will be default Wi-Fi, and the password, which is stupid, is 1 through 9 with a 0 at the end, okay? Next, we're going to create an IoT VLAN, and our IoT VLAN is going to be VLAN 10. All right, so the IP address for that will be 192.168.10.1. And it too will have a Wi-Fi name called IoT Wi-Fi. I chose the same password. Obviously, you wouldn't do that in these cases, but to keep things simple for the video, I just chose the same Wi-Fi password. And last, we're going to create a guest VLAN. Again, very common VLANs that you would see in a home. That's going to be VLAN 99. 192.168.99.1 is our IP address, and we will have Wi-Fi built around that as well. Guest Wi-Fi, and again, that same dumb password. Guys, please don't mimic that. But I, again, just wanted to keep things very, very simple for today's video. After we get those VLANs created, guys, we're going to create some firewall rules around them, okay? Now, I wanted to keep things very, very simple, very practical, but yet a real-world scenario that we would be building, which is why we only have 3 VLANs. We're also going to keep the firewall rules, again, very, very simple. But the Firewalla itself is capable of crazy things when it comes to firewall rules and routing traffic certain ways. It's pretty amazing, but we're going to keep today's example pretty small and simple. Let's talk about it. So we have our default VLAN. Our default VLAN will have full access to all of the other VLANs, and those other VLANs will be able to communicate back to the default VLAN. So this is going to allow any device in your default VLAN to be able to turn on those smart switches, run those smart TVs, talk to smart devices that you have in the house, and get a response. We're going to talk about MDNS because I know that comes up as well. So we're going to talk about how that plays into it and how Firewalla handled that too. Next, we're going to have our IoT VLAN. Now, our IoT VLAN, like most of the time, is going to be isolated and only have internet only. It will not be able to communicate with the other VLANs. Now, I know a lot of you may be wondering, can I limit it so certain devices in the IoT network can get to the internet while others can't? And the answer is yes. You can absolutely do that in Firewalla. It's not a difficult thing to do. However, for today's video, we're not going to be setting it up that way. We're just keeping this very, very high level and very, very simple. And last, we have our guest VLAN. Now, our guest VLAN, again, like the IoT, we want to be isolated. We're just going to give internet only. We don't need the dog watcher or the babysitter to have access to our Sonos or to our smart switches or anything like that. If they're a family member and you like them that much, just give them access to the default VLAN if they need that stuff. So again, guest VLANs will be isolated to internet only. Now, a couple things I want to add and talk about as it pertains to firewall rules here, okay? One thing we're going to do, and it's done a little differently in Firewalla than it is in Unifi, but we are going to make it so that the default VLAN is the only one of the 3 that has SSH capabilities into the router. But we're not going to create a firewall rule around it. We're going to actually just go into a different part of the settings and turn that on or off. It's kind of different than how we do it in Unifi. The other thing that's really different is there aren't really LAN local rules like there are with Unifi. Now, if you recall, a LAN local rule is a device, having a device on the network, on any VLAN, but a device on the network, be able to communicate with the router itself. Like go to the IP address of the gateway, 192.168.1.1, your gateway address, and a web page pops up that allows you to log into the router. Well, in Ubiquity, we block that so that the IoT devices and your camera VLAN and your guest VLAN can't do that. But with Firewalla, it's a little different. You don't manage it through the local IP like you do a lot of routers. In this case, everything's run off a phone app. So because it's on the phone app, you're not really going to an IP address to do it. So we're not going to create any rules around that. Now, it does have a desktop application, but even that is set up a little bit different. You go to my dashboard or myfirewalla.com, and then it gives you a QR code, which you take a picture using the app, and then you can get access that way. So again, we don't really have to create firewall rules around this. There's already built-in protections with Firewalla that make it a little bit different than Unifi. So I wanted to make sure I called that out because we're not going to be creating, you know, your typical LAN in, LAN out, whatever rules, and then LAN local rules. It's just done a little bit differently, but you'll get the same benefits and the same characteristics of having those firewall rules in this. It's just set up a little bit differently. Okay, so enough of that stuff. Let's get into the setup of this thing. Okay, so you are going to need the Firewalla app to do the setup today. This is what the main screen looks like after you get logged in and enter your email information. So we're going to go ahead and set this up in router mode. Now, as we add the device, it'll kind of walk you through the steps, but I do want to kind of show you how it's connected today. So we have our power connected here, and then this is just our WAN interface. By default, port 4 on the router is the default WAN interface, and it actually has a yellow box around the port, so it kind of identifies itself like a lot of routers do, okay? Now, when this thing's in router mode, you can set up VLANs on these individual ports, okay? We're gonna set up port 1 as our trunk port so it can communicate with our switch and our access points in the different VLANs. So this is gonna be our starting point. Let's go ahead and get the Firewalla online and set it up in router mode. So to do that, I'm gonna go ahead and hit Add New, okay? Firewalla Gold. It says to power on the device, so we've already done that, so we'll go ahead and say next, and then it's going to go out and search for the Firewalla using Bluetooth. You can see the blue light blinking there. Should find it pretty quickly. It's pretty fast. Okay, so there it found it. So now it says to scan the QR code. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next, and then on the bottom of the device there is a QR code. There it is. All right, now, do we want to restore from a backup or do we want to set up as new? So we'll set up as new, and yes, set up as a router. Okay, so it's going to ask us to do the connectivity. There's where it's talking about, and this picture on the left is supposed to be your internet modem connection or whatever, even though it has multiple ports on it, kind of goofy. But it does say plug it into port 4. So we'll go ahead and say next, and then we will let it do its setup. Now this could take a little while, depending on whether or not your box has updates. Most of them do out of the box, so results may vary a little bit on this, but I'll just go ahead and let this finish, and then we'll continue with the tutorial. Okay, when it gets done, you'll get the Welcome to Firewalla screen, and we'll go ahead and hit the red button here to get started. Okay, so after you hit the red bar to get in, the red button to get in, this is the main screen for Firewalla. Now, we're not going to take a deep dive, but I'm going to show you around just a little bit, just to kind of give you the nickel tour here. So at the top, you have your network performance. Shows your uptime. If you have outages, you'll get the little red notches in there showing that you had outages from certain time. You can click on the network performance graph and do speed tests, internet quality tests, lots of cool things in there, all built in. We're not going to run any of them right now, but just understand they're there. Below that, you can see how many flows, how many network communications have happened on your network. So just in the short time we've been there, we have 454 network flows or traffic conversations that have happened on the network. It'll also show you how many are blocked. So as you start creating rules, you'll get to see that block number go up, and it gets pretty crazy how much it actually blocks, which is really, really cool. It's nice to know your firewall is doing something. Then below that, we have our activity graph. So it'll kind of let you know what's happening on the network, how much upload and download. It also tells you how much total upload and download and bandwidth has moved through the network in certain periods of time. Right now we're on the 30 days, and I can drag it to the right and see the last 24 hours or even the last 60 minutes, okay? So that's kind of a nice little activity graph that gives you down. Then in the next section, you have devices, alarms, and rules, okay? The device section allows you to go in and name devices. This is very important. This is something we're going to do as part of today's video. We're going to name devices. I think it's important when you're in your router to name your devices, so when you set up rules, you know which device you're setting up the rules on. So very, very important step. This is where we go to do that. Alarms are just notifications or things that have triggered like a log entry in your device, and you can go up to your the little bell icon up to the right, trigger what you want to just log versus what you want to be notified on. You can set you know, how strict you want it to be in certain categories. Lots of cool stuff in here. Again, not part of today's video, but that's where you would go kind of tweak those notifications because notifications are great until they annoy the hell out of you, and then you just want to shut them all off. All right, and then you have rules, and rules is where we're gonna go create our firewall rules. That's how we're gonna actually create our network rules in here, but that's not all you can do in here. You can also restrict certain devices from getting to, adult content. You can set up user profile rules like time limits. You only can be on YouTube for so long per day, per device, or per child, or whatever you wanna do. There's a lot of really, really crazy things you can do in Firewalla, and there's a lot of great tools in here to make your network and your family safer when they're online. It's one of the reasons I really, really like this. And then down below is kind of things we can turn on in the network or settings we can set. And so we'll just kind of cover those real quick. So network is where we're actually going to go set up our networks. You'll see that here in a second. You can set up custom routes, smart queues, so you can do things like set priority of certain devices on the network using smart queues. There's scanning for open ports, things like that. You can run scans on the network. User profiles, that's what I was just talking about. You can create like a user profile for every one of your kids, tie their devices to their user profile, and then create rules that are at the profile level and set restrictions that apply to all their devices. Really, really cool, very, very powerful. The family thing is just making it family friendly, so you can go to certain networks like the guest network and you can make it family friendly. You can make it so your babysitter can't get to anything they're not supposed to, and they can only get to family friendly content. There's ad blocker built in. There's some VPN stuff, very powerful stuff built into Firewalla and VPNs. I hope to be able to do some videos on that down the road. Data usage, so that's really handy if you have a data limits from your ISP. This will actually track how much data you're using for the month in your billing cycle, so you can actually put in when your billing cycle is and say how much data you get per month. So if you have Starlink or something that limits it, you can actually have this keep track of it for you and actually let you know when you're close to going over your data limits based off of your billing cycle. Kind of a cool thing. So again, nothing we're going to talk today. There's some services like HTTP or DNS over HTTPS and stuff like that you can turn on. And then there's even more. If you click on more, there's even more. New device quarantine. That's a really popular. Any new device that joins the network automatically gets quarantined or automatically has these set of rules applied to them. Really, really great, really powerful. So there's some other stuff you can set in here, right? So again, lots of cool things in here. Lots of things that we are not going to cover today. And I will do a full interface, how to set things. I think I'm going to do like a top things I like to do in my Firewalla video down the line. So if that's something you're interested in, make sure you like or subscribe, because we will be doing some more Firewalla videos down the line. All right, so let's create some VLANs here. And I'm warning you, I'm kind of losing my voice here, so hopefully we'll make it through this. All right, so we kind of did our little nickel tour there. So let's go ahead and create the VLANs that we talked about in the beginning part of the video here. So to do that, we're going to click on network and we're going to come in here. Now, while it's loading up our network manager, by default, Firewalla gives you a LAN and a WAN. It just kind of puts one in here, right? So the ISP1 is our WAN port. And you can see with the little blue box, that's port 4, and that's where we have our WAN connection set up. And then our LAN is set up on ports 1, 2, and 3, and that's signified with those blue boxes. So right now, as it stands, if anybody plugged into ports 1, 2, or 3, they're going to pull a LAN address of 192.168.181.1. Again, it picks random ones. It doesn't really have like every Firewalla box is a 181 like a lot of routers do. It just picks random ones, and you'll see there's a surprise me feature inside if you don't want to pick your networks for you. So now we want this to match what we talked about earlier. So we're going to go in and we're actually going to edit our LAN first. Okay, so we want this one to be our default. Now let's get into it. All right, so if I click in there and I choose edit at the top right, couple things we want to do. One, I want to rename this to default. I want, whenever you see this network, it's named default, which is what we called it earlier. Okay. Then you see our LAN type. So we have LAN and VLAN. Let me explain the difference here. So a VLAN is a virtual LAN. However, a LAN is tied to a physical port. So think of it like your native VLAN. So when you plug into a port that has multiple VLANs passing through it, whatever you have set as the native VLAN on that port is what you pull an IP address for when you physically plug in, okay? That's the same here. So our LAN address is what we would pull when we physically plug into ports 1, 2, or 3. Now, I want my switch in our example and my AP to pull an IP address from our default network. So I'm gonna leave these checked, and I'm also going to leave this set as a LAN type, okay? But I don't like that IP address, so we're going to change that. So you can see the little surprise me. You can click that, and it'll just pick random ones if you don't want to pick, but we know what we want it to be. So I'm going to just click into the little IP address setting, and we're going to go down and choose 1.1, which is what we talked about earlier. And then I also like my starting DHCP address to not start really low. I like a little bit of buffer in case I have static IPs. You can set this however you like to do it, but I'm just going to start mine with 10. So the first IP address it would hand would be 10. Now, Firewalla doesn't start with 10. It'll send random ones. It doesn't start here and move up, but it will never give us 1 through 9, right? So we're just going to make sure that happens. So I'm going to hit done. We're going to keep scrolling here. You can turn off IPv6 if you don't plan on using it in your network. We're just going to leave it alone. There's DHCP options. That's some special advanced settings. If you need certain things to happen with DHCP or certain assignments to happen to certain machines, you can do that by adding DHCP options. We're not going to do that. But I did want to talk about MDNS and this SDDP. So if we read down below, it says MDNS and SSDP relay allows you to use devices and features across networks. When multicasting is on, this network can relay between other networks. So this is like Unifi's MDNS, where you want your devices on your default network to be able to discover devices on other VLANs, right? And that MDNS helps with that discovery. And apparently this SSDP is another protocol that certain types of IoT devices use. So I'm just turning it on. I don't know what it really is tied to, but both of these are giving us the same capability to be able to discover devices on different networks. So when we're setting up our IoT devices or you have Home Assistant going on, you can actually use it. So we're going to leave both of those on. And then I'm just going to call out down below if you wanted to block ICMP from this network responding to the internet, which I think is typically a good setting. I'm just going to leave it off for today's video, but just understand if you didn't want this to respond to internet request pings, you could turn it off there. Okay, so now we have it set the way we want, our LAN address. We're going to go ahead and hit save. And this just takes a second to save the settings because you're talking to the app, which is talking to a web, type deal and shooting the configuration down to Firewalla. So it does take a second to save your configurations. Same thing with Unifi when you're managing it from the cloud. It's got to talk to the physical hardware and push that config down. This is very, very similar. All right, so that's done. So I'm going to hit the back arrow now. So we have our default network, a 1.1, and we have our WAN. So let's go ahead and create a new VLAN. And we do that by clicking the Create Network. Okay, now you have some choices here. There's other WAN connections. So you can actually do multi-WAN on a Firewalla and have failover. So you could create another WAN address if you wanted to. Then we have our local networks, which is LAN or VLANs. We're going to do that. There's a pre-built guest network, which we're going to do next. And then a lockdown network. And the lockdown basically says you can't get anywhere. No internet, no talking to other VLANs. You can only talk amongst yourselves. If that's something useful, you can set that up with the click of the button, and it sets up all the rules and does everything for you, which is kind of nice. So we're going to choose LAN network. Now I want to name this one. So we're going to go in here and name this IoT. All right. And the type this time is going to be a VLAN. All right. We're going to use a VLAN. The VLAN ID is going to be 10, if you recall. And our settings down here, we want this to be 192.168.10.1. Okay. And again, I like my DHCP not to start low, so we'll do 10.10 for that. Again, personal preference. And then I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to turn both of these on in IoT. That's enabling these protocols to communicate, not necessarily be able to talk directly with things, but this is that multicast, being able to discover devices with all these protocols. I'm going to turn this on. Now, this is how I typically have MDNS set in my Unifi network too. I have my main network and my IoT network, both able to communicate with MDNS. But in this case, I am adding the other protocol. Once we're all done, I need to choose a port. So in this case, I'm going to choose port 1, okay? I've made this a trunk port by doing this because it's also port 1 is also set up as a LAN port that's going to hand out the 192.168.1. address, and now VLAN 10 can also communicate on port 1 as well. Now, I could check 2 and 3 and make those trunk ports as well, but I'm going to leave them alone. They are just going to be physical LAN ports. They're not going to be able to communicate to all the VLANs. We're just going to reserve that for port 1. All right, let's hit save. Okay, so that's done. Now we're going to go ahead and just quickly create our guest network. So I'm going to go in, create network. I'm going to choose guest network. We're actually going to rename this to guest. Okay, it's going to be a VLAN, port 1. We're going to change the IP address, but you can see under the template there, we have a template for guest network. It actually is going to just enforce a built-in template that we have. But I want to change the IP address. I want this to be 99.1. Okay, I want to start won't have any reservations in here, but we'll still put it at 10. I don't want MDNS or SSDP turned on, none of that. Obviously, part of the profile with a guest is to block the ping request. And the last thing we need to do is enter the VLAN ID. I skipped that earlier to 99, and we'll go ahead and hit save. All right, guys, so once you get those set up, you can see you'll go back to the kind of summary page, and you can see our default, guest, and IoT all summarized on the page. Now, let's create some firewall rules around these. And this is going to be very simple, very quick, because we don't have to create a ton to achieve what we want to get out of this. So we're going to hit the back arrow here to go back to the main screen, and this time we're going to choose rules. Now, you'll notice that there is a guest section already created with 2 rules in it. So I'm going to go ahead and click into them. They are both block rules. So the first block rule is traffic from the internet. We're going to block all that. We don't want requests coming from the internet and getting a response from our guest network. That's kind of a given. And then traffic to all local networks. So basically, if you're on guest, it's going to block traffic to all of your local VLANs and LAN networks. Okay, so that is built in, 2 block rules. The only thing left is access to the internet. Kind of cool. Now, let's go ahead and create our rules that we talked about earlier. The first one we're going to create is to allow our default network to talk to all other networks, okay? So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to click a rule, or click add rule, and this is going to be an allow rule, all right? And the target, so let's click that first. You can see there's just a ton of things in here, from apps that you can allow or block to target lists. I mean, just all sorts of things. Certain domains, remote ports, local ports, regions, porn sites, gaming sites, you name it, right? Lots of stuff, but we're going to choose local network. All the firewall rules that we're talking about are going to be local network rules. We're going to choose local network rules, and we're going to say all. We want the default to have access to all of it, and we're just going to say traffic to all local networks on the default network, and we're going to hit save. That's going to allow our default network to be able to communicate to all of our other VLANs, and even though it didn't explicitly put it in here, be able to get a response back. As long as the traffic initiates from the default network, you'll be able to get a response, which is really cool. So we're going to go ahead and add our block rule for IoT. Again, very, very simple here, guys. That's all we really had to do. So we're going to go hit add rule. We're going to choose block this time. The target is going to be a local network, all local networks, to all local networks from the IoT. So this one is going to block traffic to all local networks from IT. The IoT network is not allowed to initiate communication to any of the other networks in here. And you don't have to list them. There's just all of them. So if you had 10 VLANs in here, if you hit all. If you wanted to create, so it could talk to certain VLANs, maybe you have a camera VLAN and you want it to be able to talk to your NAS or something like that, you'd have to go in and individualize and create a separate allow rule for that before you blocked everything else. So very similar to how you do in Unifi, there's an order to things and you want to allow certain rules before you block other rules. But in this case, very, very simple, very, very straightforward. We just want to block it. So we're just going to choose save. And now we have our firewall rules created. Now, again, we could get very granular. We could set a lot of rules, but I want to keep this train chugging down the tracks here. So that's what we're going to do right now. And I'll do a little bit of ping test at the end of the video showing that things are working like we want. All right, so there's our firewall rules. Now we kept it very simple. Obviously we can get way more granular, way more detail. We could set up all sorts of things, but this is going to serve our purpose. This is the bare bones version of this, but it's going to serve our purpose and allow that firewall separation between our VLANs. So we're just going to leave things how they are and keep the video moving along here. Now, I had mentioned earlier you don't use firewall rules to block SSH. It's actually done just in the settings of your Firewalla. So I want to go show you guys that next. So to get there, we're going to hit the back button and exit out of that firewall rules. And then we're going to just go into the settings gear, which is in the top right-hand corner. Okay, and then we're going to choose advanced. This is an advanced setting. And then we're going to choose configuration. Okay. Now, once in there, you'll see SSH console and then the DNS booster. All right, so I'm going to choose SSH console. Now, mine went right into it, but when you guys go into it for the first time, you're going to see that your SSH password is going to show as expired, and you're going to have some asterisks there. Just click on the asterisks. It will generate a new SSH password or the first one for you, and then you'll be brought to this screen, okay? So once you're in this screen, you can see how we can actually restrict access or give access to certain VLANs to be able to SSH into our device. If we never wanted to be able to SSH into our router, we could turn it all off, right? We don't need the default network to do it. And then you can just go turn it on when you wanted to be able to SSH into your equipment. You can toggle it on, use it, and then turn it off. That's probably the most secure way of doing it. But let's just talk through this. So for those of you who want to SSH over the internet, you can do that. We're not going to be doing that. You can see that the guest network does not have access as part of those built-in guest template that we used earlier. No access, so that is toggled off. IoT is turned on though, so I'm going to just go ahead and turn that off, okay? So we got that turned off. All right, I'm just going to leave the default turned on for right now. Now, as it comes with a password, you don't get to pick your password here, guys. Firewall is going to do that for you. So if you'd like to know what your password is, you have to click on the little asterisk there, and then it's going to give you the option to reset the password, copy the password, or reveal the password. So we will go ahead and reveal it. And this is the password that you would use to log in to your device. Now, this is going to come in handy here when we get to the next part of this video, but I need to drop a little truth bomb on you here before we do that, okay? Now, I want to be honest with you guys. Linux is not my strong suit, okay? So when I first set out to do this and kind of prove that I could make it work, and I went out to Firewalla's help site to do that, I'll be honest with you, I ran the list of commands, they put them all in there for you, I edited the file, it even validated correctly, but I could not get the Unifi splash page to come up. I couldn't make it work. I just couldn't, and I got very frustrated, and I don't know enough about Linux to really troubleshoot things and get in there and find out what I did wrong. So I almost thought I couldn't do this part of the video, but I did reach out on the internet or go look on the internet and found a guy who has a GitHub site that did all the work for us. He actually, you run one command and it installs everything, the Docker container, the Unifi software, everything, and it works perfectly. And all we got to do is run one command. But I did want to throw a little bit of caution to you out there, guys, because this part of it is not straightforward, right? If you have to troubleshoot something in your Firewalla, like the page quits loading, you're going to be doing it with Linux commands. There's no GUI to be able to do this with, right? You're going to be SSHing into the box and trying to use Linux to troubleshoot why your controller software isn't working or why it isn't updating. So I wanted to call this out, and this is important. It is neat that the Firewalla can run this software and be your controller, but just understand, Ubiquiti also makes it really easy that if you're a Windows guy like I am, or even a Mac person, you can install the Unifi controller software on a Mac or on a Windows PC. You can install it on a whole bunch of different things. You do not have to use your Firewalla router. And if you're a Windows guy or a Mac guy, you know how to use that hardware already. You know how to update it. You know how to get in there and troubleshoot things when they don't work right. Understand that there could be a learning curve here if you are not already a Linux guy. Now, if you guys are my Linux gurus, you guys are really like this, you'll probably point out all the things I'm doing wrong and why this was a stupid way to do it. But I did want to show you that it's possible. And so I want to keep things rolling. I am going to use the guy's GitHub site. It worked awesome. It really, really did. Super easy. And just work flawlessly. But just understand you don't have to do it this way. You can still use Firewalla as your router, but not have it be the controller. You can go pick up a mini PC that runs Windows and install it on that. I just wanted to call that out because as I had troubles, I can almost forecast other people who are new, right? My site is for people who are new, also having troubles, and I don't want to take you down a road that you don't want to be on. So into the truth bomb there. Sorry I'm not better at this stuff, but I wanted to be honest with every single one of you who follow me because I think you deserve that. So we're going to keep the video rolling. I'm going to show you how I got it to work, and you guys can proceed as you feel comfortable. All right, guys, so let's get to this. So like I mentioned earlier, we're going to use a program called PuTTY to SSH into our box. And so I'm just showing you, you can go out to putty.org and download a copy of that to put on your computer if you need to be able to install something. If you have your own, that's fine, whatever you want to use. But this is the one I'm going to be using for today's video, and I just wanted to show it to you. Now, we are physically connected into our Firewalla. I have an Ethernet cable going from my laptop into port 2 on the Firewalla, and we have pulled an IP address from the Firewalla. IP config. Okay, so we have a 192.168.1.232 address, which is great. That's what we want. We want to be on the same subnet, or we need to be on the same subnet as our default network on the Firewalla, and that's how we have it set up so that all the LAN ports would be able to pull one of these addresses, okay? So you have to be physically connected in, get your PuTTY software, and then we're going to get going here. So the site that we're going to be following is this one right here. Again, I'll make sure there's links in the description. He's basically created a single command that installs the Unifi controller and a Docker software on any of the Firewalla gold boxes. Read through this, guys. Don't just follow the crazy YouTube guy, right? Read through it. Make sure you kind of understand it. But basically it says to install SSH in and then copy this link in. And we're going to go through that here next. So I'm going to go ahead and SSH into our Firewalla box. So to do that, I'm going to open up PuTTY. I don't have to mess with any settings. I just want to double check that SSH is checked and that we're in port 22, but all that is done by default. So and then I'm going to put the gateway in. Okay, 192.168.1.1, and then we're going to come in here. Now the default login, the username is P-I, so you're going to hit enter, and then it's going to ask you for your password. Your password is whatever it says in your SSH console on your app. So yours is going to be different than mine. And as you type in PuTTY, if you're using this and are using it for the first time, you will not see the cursor move as you're typing. That's normal. So don't think that you're not doing anything. If you make a mistake, just hit the backspace a whole bunch of times. All that still works, but you just don't see the cursor move, okay? So let me try and get this typed in here. Okay, when you get done, hit enter. And this is what you guys should see. Okay, should look just like this when you get done. All right, so something else about PuTTY. Anything that you highlight, okay, so if you highlight an IP address, it automatically copies it to your clipboard. And to paste it, you don't use Control-V or any of the shortcuts. You just right-click on your mouse and it'll actually paste it in there, okay? So anything you paste, you just right-click on the screen and it'll paste it in there. So we're going to come over here to our command and we're going to click the copy button. So it says it's copied. Open back up our PuTTY and I'm just going to right-click and it pastes it in there and then just hit enter. Okay, so it's going to go do its thing. This should take a minute, so I'm just going to let it run. I might do a little fast forwarding for you guys. All right, so when it gets done, you're going to be presented with this. You'll get a cursor again. You could type something else. It's the only command we have to type, so we don't need to do anything further, but let's read this, okay? So let's make sure you're looking at this. Now, there's a couple things I want to make sure we highlight in here, okay? So it says you can open up this web address. Notice it's a 172.16.1.2:8443, okay? So it created an entirely new subnet on our Firewalla box for this Docker, okay? So you have to understand that's going to come into play here in just a second, okay? It says if you go to that, you may get a security warning. That's okay. We're just going to, we don't have any SSL certificates on our box, so we'll get a warning when we try to go to it. And then it also says this may take a minute to start and be accessible. It takes a minute for the web server to start. So just give it a minute or two and make sure you refresh your browser. Okay, now this is very important, guys. and I'll show you here what it does when you go too early. But this will take a good full minute, maybe even up to 5 minutes for all the services to begin, everything to start like it's supposed to, so we can continue using the Unifi software. But as far as the installation goes, everything is done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here, go back to my browser. I'm going to open up PuTTY here. Let's copy this. So again, all I have to do is highlight this to copy it. So now it's copied to my clipboard. We're going to come back over to my browser. I'm going to close out of the PuTTY page. I'm going to refresh this page just so we get a nice fresh session. Add a tab and paste that in there and hit enter. All right, so here's our privacy warning. However, I'm guessing that when I hit advanced and click on the link to proceed, it's going to say that everything's still starting up. That's typically what I expect to see. So yeah, so this is not, it's doing something in the background, guys. We're just a little bit too early. So what I'll do is I'm going to just leave this page up, and it will refresh itself and should open up our Unifi startup page once it gets refreshed. So I'm just going to leave this up and let it roll, and then when the page comes up, we'll proceed with the tutorial. All right, so now we're up and running. Now we're in business. Now you can see our URL. We're at 172.16.1.2 with the port behind it there, and it's letting us set this up as a new controller. Now, 172.16.1.2, that is a new Docker subnet that it actually created on our Firewalla. Right now, as it stands, this is a local controller only. This controller cannot access the internet, okay? So, if you like the idea of only having a local controller, we can set everything up on here, create local logins, and it will be your local controller. But you will not, as it sits right now, be able to manage this through unifi.ui.com. However, we can fix that. I'm going to show you what you need to do to make that happen. However, as it stands right now, post-install, this is only local. So if I put in here, and I'm just going to go ahead and add our thing. So I'm going to call this Fire SE Unifi. Okay, so we're just going to call it Fire SE Unifi, United States. If I click OK and hit next, all right, if I sign into my Unifi account right here, normally it would just let me sign in and it would authenticate, but it's going to error out. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so it says there's a problem logging in. It didn't even bring up my multi-factor authentication app, nothing. It could not trigger that process. Okay, so it just won't let us do it. Don't think you're typing anything in wrong. It just does not have the ability to validate your authentication online. So we're just going to click Advanced Setup to bypass this, and we're going to hit Skip. You can create an account if you want to, but I'm assuming you have Unifi stuff. We're going to go ahead and say Skip, and we're just going to create local credentials for this box. So I'm just going to call this Fire Admin, and I'm going to pick a password. Okay, and then I'm going to put my personal email in here. Okay, and I'm going to say finish. And now it's going to set up our server for us. Okay, so this should look familiar to you as it fires up here and gets loaded up, and it'll take a second to get fully loaded. Okay, we don't have any devices connected in here yet. There's no clients. We just are logging into a bare bones controller. And real quick, just to kind of show you, if I go to System here and go to Advanced, I think it is, and hit Remote Management, basically being able to run this off the app and everything. If I try and log in here, it will also fail. So, and that's just because 172, this new subnet that it created, we didn't make it routable. That subnet doesn't exist in the route tables on the Firewalla. So we need to go fix that if we want to be able to use this online. So let's go ahead and do that real quick, and I'll show you what that process is like. Now I'm going to get my phone going here so I can record the screen. Okay, so I'm on the main page here, so I'm going to hit dismiss on that error here. So we're going to go into, from the main screen, we're going to go into networks, and all we need to do is create that network so it can route to the internet. So we're going to create it as if we're going to create it as if it's a new network that we're going to use. We're not going to use it. We're going to just basically build it and reserve it for this purpose only, but we're going to build a local network. We're going to come up here and we're going to name it Docker. Okay, just so we know that's what it is. It's a VLAN, that's fine. VLAN ID is going to be, you can pick one. So there's a 172.16.1 address. Normally that would be a VLAN 1, but let's just call it 111, like 111. So I'm just going to call it 111 just to give it something. I'm going to go ahead and pick a port like we did previously. Okay, I'm not going to worry about, now we need to come down here and choose our subnet IP. So we're going to do 172.16.1.1, okay? Click somewhere else on the screen and allow us, or hit done. I don't care about any of the other stuff. I don't care about MDNS, any of that stuff. Really, I just need the subnet, the VLAN, and the VLAN ID, and a name. So we're going to hit save. Okay, so now we're going back to the network manager here, and you can see that we have one called Docker. And again, you can give it whatever VLAN ID you want. I just chose 111 since it's a one dot address. That's up to you. So now that we've created that, let's go back into our computer here and click the remote management button. And I'm going to go ahead and log in with my credentials. Now I'm getting prompted. Yes, it's me. Oh, there it goes. It just took a second. Okay, so now, because we have enabled remote management, no save button, we will be able to manage this system from unifi.ui.com. So I'll show you that here in a little bit. But let's go ahead and get our equipment running on it. So we're going to go ahead and plug in our switch. We're going to plug in our AP, and we're going to get this thing online. So let's get that going here. All right, so I'm going to plug a cable from port 1 on the box into port 47, just like our diagram showed. Okay, the switch is powered up right now, just so you know. And I'm going to go ahead and plug in our AP2, and I don't remember what port we chose, but I'm going to go ahead and plug it into port 32 and let that power up. There it is. All right, so we're going to go ahead, click to adopt, and then we should see our AP come online once it gets booted up, and we'll be able to adopt that too. And so we're going to talk about next in the video, we're going to talk about what it's like to have a third-party router managing a Unifi network. Yes, we can log into it directly to get to the Unifi software, but you're still using a third-party router, okay? And we're going to talk about some of the pros and cons of that in this video, because I think it's important for you guys to understand maybe what you're getting into and just talk through some of it. Now, it is fun to play with. It's really neat, but for a lot of you, the goal here was to save the money buying a Unifi gateway and buying a Firewalla. So after you see it, you'll kind of have to decide, is it really worth that savings to be jumping through some of the hoops that we're going to have to jump through? All right, so everything is up to date, everything's working. Now, here's kind of one of the downsides to using something like this. You're going to have to manage it in two places, okay? So with a Unifi gateway, when you go in and you create a network, for example, it tells all the equipment that's plugged into your network what about that new change that you just made. When you create a Wi-Fi network, same thing. It's going to tell every device that needs to know what happens. Well, when you create a network inside the Firewalla app, it has no way of telling Unifi or telling the AP, here's your network. I just created this VLAN. Here's your VLANs assignments. You can't do it. You have to manage them separately. So the first thing we need to do, now that we have this equipment up and running, is we have to go recreate the VLANs in this switch so it knows about them and can tag the traffic accordingly. Okay, so we're going to do that first. So we're going to come down here in the settings, just as if we were going to create a new network. And you can see we got some stuff grayed out because these things are grayed out because you can't do these settings without a gateway. And because we're using a third-party gateway, the Unifi controller can't see it. So, all right, so we're going to start with networks here. We have our default network, which is fine, 192.168.1.1. All right, if that's named something different, you can rename it to default. But we just need to create these other VLANs, okay? So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to pull up my Firewall as my cheat sheet. Since I created them yesterday, I want to make sure that I'm typing everything right. So we're going to go create new virtual network. We're going to give it a name. It's going to be IoT. And we just have to type what the VLAN ID is. So it's VLAN 10. And that's all there is to do. Okay, it's for the router, we're using a third-party router. That's our Firewalla. So we're just going to go ahead and say add. Okay, and it's going to create that VLAN. Then I'm going to go create our guest. All right, and that was VLAN 99. Okay. All right, now the 172 Docker network I created, I'm not going to create on the switch. We're not going to ever plug anything in that needs to talk on that Docker network. It is 100% reserved on the router for the router to be able to get online and have the controller get to reach the internet. So I don't need to create that VLAN in here. But if you have other VLANs, your camera VLAN, or maybe you have some other types of VLANs, non-internet VLANs, whatever you have in your setup, you will need to go in here and manually create. Okay? So let's go make sure that our everything's learned. Yep, everything's green, so we're good there. All right, so the next thing we want to do is create some Wi-Fi, right? We talked about this earlier. Now that our switch knows about our VLANs and our VLANs are created in Firewalla, we can actually go into our Wi-Fi settings and create these networks. So we're going to click on Wi-Fi, and let's see, we did default Wi-Fi, one word, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Default Wi-Fi. All right, and I believed I had my stupid password of 1 through 9 with a 0 at the end. Okay, so I'll just show you the dumb password that you're never supposed to use. We're going to leave this on the default network. Okay, I'm going to choose manual. We want to use all of the keys. I'm going to turn off band steering, and I'm going to turn on fast roaming. These are just personal preferences. I like BSS transition, fast roaming turned on for any network that I'm going to be walking around with my devices, and I want my devices to roam. Okay, I don't necessarily need band steering on. I don't think it's necessary, but I could have left that on. Okay, so when I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and hit add network. All right, so we have our networks created. So our U7 Pro is going to be learning those. All right, so as you can see, a lot of the process for setting these up is the same as if you're using a Ubiquiti router. I mean, you still go in, you create your Wi-Fi networks, you still tweak the settings. Some settings may not be really, some settings are done by the router. And so Ubiquiti does a pretty good job of graying out the ones that you don't care about. So you might have to play with some of the settings. It might be a little different than what you're used to seeing as if you had a Unifi gateway. So just understand that you're going to have to manage these separately. All right, so I just wanted to show you a couple quick ping tests here just to show you that, in fact, their firewall rules are working as far as the direction of traffic and what can ping what. So I set up a couple devices on a couple of different networks, and we're just going to do some ping tests. Now, I realize this isn't a full extensive test with Home Assistant and casting our devices up to screen. So if that's something you guys want to see with the firewall, I'm happy to set that up, but we'll kind of treat it as its own video just to make sure that the MDNS and stuff is working like it should. So I just wanted to, for this video, I wanted to keep things, again, very simple, very high level. We're just going to do some ping tests back and forth. So I have a couple PCs here. This box right here is representing the one I'm on. So I am on the main default network, and I'm actually from this computer remoted into a computer on the IoT network, which right there is telling you that it's working, but we'll still do some ping test here. So the other computer is 192.168.10.52. And so we're going to try doing a little bit of pinging back and forth. So I'm going to go ahead on my main computer here, and I'm going to ping that IP address, 192.168.10.52. Okay. Oops. Got to put the space in there, guys. All right, so you can see that I can ping my computer on the IoT network. Should be no big surprise there, being that I'm remoted into it right now. But we'll go ahead and come over here and we will ping my PC, which is 1.125. So ping 192.168.1.125. And you can see no pings are getting through. My phone is actually on the guest network here. So let's see what IP address it was given. It was given 99.26, so we will try pinging that. Ping 192.168.99.26. Okay, also can't ping that, so those two are isolated. If we come over here, Control C, ping 192.168.99.26. Okay, I can ping from the default network to all of our other VLANs, which is really, really good, right? That's what we wanted. We want that to be, this is how we want it to work. Now, again, obviously more extensive testing could be done. We'll save that for another video, but I just wanted to show you that these rules were, in fact, working the way we set them up the other day. So, all right, guys, so before we wrap up here, I wanted to kind of talk about just real quick who this is for and who it's not for. Now, Ubiquity's kind of got, you know, some knocks in the past in the firewall department. It's not a very advanced firewall, and it's coming around. They've really turned a corner. They have new zone-based firewalls, which I'm really excited to do some videos on and get in there and play with it a little bit. So I think they've turned a corner, but up to now, they really haven't been seen as a lead innovator in the firewall department. So a lot of people use pfSense and some of these other firewalls with their Ubiquity network because they like the interface of Ubiquity, but they just didn't like what you got from the firewall inside a Ubiquity gateway, and that's very understandable. Now, I think a general home user, if you guys are new to and upgrading from the Linksys or the Orbis or whatever like that, I think you'll find it does just fine. But it really is known for being a little bit more flashy than function. Yeah, you can see your Netflix traffic and you can see the fancy graphs, but you really can't dive down in and see your traffic actually where it is, where it's going. You kind of just get some general graphs, and I think a lot of people don't love that about it. And one of the things I like about Firewalla is you get that additional information. But is it worth it to replace my gateway with a Firewalla router? Now, for me personally, I don't think so. I don't know that I would really like to be in two different systems all the time managing my network. For me, I would rather just buy the Firewalla, bite the bullet one time, pay the price, add it to my Ubiquity network so I get the functionality and the best of both worlds. I get the additional data from the Firewalla, I get the additional control to be able to set time limits and things that Ubiquity just can't do, but I also get the single pane of glass for all of the management of my network, right? It's kind of, you're kind of using them in two different ways, right? You're using this one to monitor your data and block things and run things on a day-to-day basis, but you're using the Ubiquity network to be your network and set the firewall rules and let it actually do all the IP addressing and things like that. So to me, I think that's the route I would rather go. But you guys decide. There's nobody that can decide this but you. I mean, you guys may have saw this and be like, yep, that's cool. I want to do it. And that's perfectly okay. The goal here was just kind of to take you down that road, let you see it for yourself so you can make that decision. So guys, I hope you found this helpful. I hope you like the firewall. If there's anything else you'd like to see, I got more stuff coming, but just put it in the comments. We've created a really great little community here, guys. I love the fact that you guys are responsive and get on the comments. I try to answer as many of them as I can, although they're getting more and more vast every time I grow a little bit more. So I'll do my best to get a comment back to you if you guys write me. But guys, our viewers do read the comments, so please be constructive, help others. If there's something in here that I skipped, or a great Linux site you can go to learn Linux, whatever it is, guys, let's help each other. I think it's really great. So thanks for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. I appreciate you guys being here. We'll see you guys down the road in a future video.